everybody, and welcome to today's Leaders for Tomorrow's Future podcast. This podcast is so exciting for me. This is a place where people can be inspired to redefine the narrative about what it means to be a leader in society today. You'll hear a collection of stories from various personas about how people see themselves as leaders or those who are maybe hesitant to do that. These people need not have an organizational leadership title. In fact, their power rests in the people they serve, the communities they form, and in their ability to tap into something both large and small within themselves to take an action and make tomorrow a better place. If you only take one thing away from this podcast, I would ask that you see yourself as the leader or person you want and choose to be, knowing that parts of you already are one. Thank you so much for being here. I'm your host, Amanda Calzolaio. I'm a leadership and team coach. Now let's get this started and join me in welcoming today's leaders for tomorrow's future. Welcome everybody to today's Leaders for Tomorrow's Future podcast. Today I'm joined by Leroy Rudder. He's a civil litigation personal injury lawyer specializing in catastrophic impairment law. Andrew is a published author of the LexisNexis Inc. book entitled Catastrophic Impairment Law in Canada, a director of Head Injury Rehabilitation Ontario, and the founder of the Rudder Law Professional Corporation. He blogs and vlogs regularly on the entitled channel Personal Injury Lawyer Tips. His practice is devoted to severe and catastrophic plaintiffs, personal injury tort cases, including motor vehicle collisions, slips and falls, and assaults, as well as accident benefits and disability benefit claims. His clients include those people who have sustained catastrophic impairments such as catastrophic traumatic brain injury, spinal cord injury and fractures, paraplegia, tetraplegia, severe impairment of ambulatory mobility and or use of an arm, amputation of a leg or an arm, loss of vision, or a mental and behavioral disorder. He's a recent award winner of the 2022 Reisman Award for the Best New Law Firm, recognizing his work for Press for Change in the law system. Andrew received his honors Bachelor's of Arts degree from York University, majoring in philosophy, and he earned his law degree from the University of Windsor. Andrew, it's so great to have you here today. Welcome.
Thank you for having me, Amanda. It's a pleasure to be with you today.
I know we have lots of things we can touch on and many directions we can go given your background. So you have started to make a name for yourself in the legal field, especially in the catastrophic impairment law space in Canada. So I thought it'd be a great place to start by diving into what attracted you to the law profession.
Well, I was attracted to the law profession early on as a young boy growing up in Toronto. My grandmother used to watch a show some of your listeners might be familiar with called Matlock. Starring the late great Andy Griffith, and I was so intrigued by his character they portrayed on TV. He was a small town guy in a small town. He had a kind of a country way of himself. He was so thorough in his preparation for the cases that he took on. He didn't have a lot of extended resources to rely upon. He wasn't part of a big corporate law firm. It was just himself and a few other individuals. And I was just amazed at the way that the different angles he would take in approaching cases and just how eloquently he expressed himself and he fought vigorously for his clients' rights in the courtroom. He was just a master in the courtroom and how he conducted the trials and how he found out that little thing that would give him that competitive edge to win the case for his clients. And I was just so intrigued by him and everything that he did. I was just drawn to the legal profession ever since then.
What a big impact from one show, eh?
Yeah.
The influence of these media that we can have in our lives. And I heard you speak specifically to certain elements of how he conducted himself and went and pursued, a case or defended someone or, really was thoughtful and thorough and creative in the approaches. Is that how you see yourself approaching the law now?
Absolutely. I pride myself in taking a deep dive approach every case that I take on. I like to understand my clients intimately. That starts right from the beginning, where I take it upon myself. Once I have a client who's interested in retaining my services, I visit their house. I go to myself. I take the time not just to know the person who was injured, but I also take the time to know their family and their loved ones and the people that they care about, right? Because you gain a lot more insight about an individual by talking to the people that they love. And you also learn about, what's there to them, right? And it also gives you more motivation. Oftentimes that I'm going up against an insurance company who views my clients as a claim number, policy number. I like to remind them that this is an individual. This is a person. This is a person who's, based on the decisions and the outcome of the case that I'm bringing forth is going to impact their life, right? So it's much easier to turn away from someone when you view them as a policy number, as a claim number, than when you know them as a particular person who has a family that they care and love about. And yeah, and like Matlock, he used to visit the crime scene. I remember as a boy watching him growing up. And like me, I like to visit the accident scene. Right? I like to get a good visual of how this accident took place, recreate the accident dynamics in my mind. So I really pride myself on taking a deep dive approach, digging into the law, finding precedents that I could rely upon that would be persuasive, doing everything I can to try to get the best result for my clients.
Yeah, it seems to me that the data is important, right? You need to be able to win over your case and have all aspects of the data coming together to do that. But also knowing that there's a person behind the data is really something that is a driving point for you. But it also brings the data to life, right? It's this dynamic that's working together very strongly. And you're going into a field that, this is very personal to the people you're engaging with, right? It's their whole life has been perhaps shattered or changed dramatically over one incident. So what made you want to do catastrophic impairment law?
Well, for me, I've always had a desire to help people ever since I was young, and help people. It started out helping like marginalized groups, visible minorities, people who offer on the other end of systemic discrimination and systemic racism. And then as I got into the law, I started to, expand more and start to help people who suffered more severe injuries. I mean, I'm one lawyer, and I would love to help out every single person, but unfortunately I can't. So I have to make a decision as to who I'm going to focus my attention on. And for me, if I could focus on a select few, people, I want to help the people who are in most need of my help or my legal services. And from my experience, those are people who sustain the more severe catastrophic injuries and impairments. Their road to recovery is the longest. Their rehabilitation and treatment needs are the greatest, right? So those are individuals who I chose to focus my attention on and help, because they're in the most need of my help.
Most in need. Was there something that would trigger that for you to say those people really need my help? Was there like a moment for you that did that?
Yeah, I mean, there was the first catastrophic impairment case that I got, which involved a young Indigenous girl, 17-year-old girl. When I saw the impact that the accident had on her, and knowing her background, knowing she was a young mother of a disabled infant, knowing she lost her brother, who she was very close to, through suicide, a month, 2 months before this tragic accident involved her, knowing that she was a single mother, seeing how the insurance company was trying to take advantage of a bureaucratic glitch in the legislation to try to deny her what we call a catastrophic impairment designation. All of that just drew me to helping her even more, seeing where she came from, seeing how this accident dramatically changed her life, and seeing how young she was and how this was going to impact her life forever, and also her ability to take care of her disabled infant. When I hear those kind of stories, they really pull my heartstrings, and they really motivate me even more to dig deep, take that deep dive, and fight vigorously for them and passionately.
And that you did. And you're speaking to a case that, my understanding, actually changed the provincial law system and made an amendment in some of the guidelines. Would you like to speak more about that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, so this involved my young, at the time, 17-year-old Indigenous client. Her accident was very severe. It took place on Six Nations Reserve, Six Nations of the Grand River Reservation. She was a passenger in the car. Her cousin was driving at just over 100 kilometers an hour, lost control of the vehicle, veered off to the side. The car rolled over multiple times, hit a tree, sent her head first through the windshield. She suffered severe traumatic brain injury, hemorrhages, bleeds in the brain, as well as spinal fractures, and fracture in her hip and her wrist and her elbow. And this is around the time when the legislation was amended. The legislation in Ontario for catastrophic impairment designation was amended on June 1st, 2016. And I was, of course, familiar with the changes. And upon review of the legislation, I intuitively knew my client met all of the criteria to get what's called a catastrophic impairment designation because of the severe traumatic brain injury she sustained. So at the time, I did what any good personal injury lawyer would do. I got a medical opinion from a doctor, a neuropsychologist with a PhD, who reviewed all the medical evidence and agreed with me and said, yes, she meets the three main criteria to get this CAT designation. And then the insurance company actually retained their own specialist, and who was a neurologist, and their doctor also agreed with us in terms of agreeing that she met the three criteria for this catastrophic impairment. So I thought the case was closed, but apparently it was not.
Oh no!
The insurance company pointed out in one of the criteria, which required her to be admitted as an inpatient to a hospital listed in a guideline. And of course, this guideline referred to a list of 12 hospitals that were determined to be hospitals one should be admitted to because they were level 1 trauma centers. And you wouldn't be admitted as an inpatient to a level 1 trauma center unless you suffered a very severe, in this case, traumatic brain injury. The hospital that my client was admitted to was the Hamilton General Hospital, which is a level 1 trauma center. Oddly enough, was not on that list. And based on that reason, they denied her a catastrophic impairment designation. And just for your listeners, rather, to get an idea of the significance of it, initially her policy limits were $65,000 for her medical rehabilitation treatment needs. To get a catastrophic impairment designation, it increased her policy limits to $1 million. And $65,000 may seem like a lot to some, but when you have such a severe catastrophic injury as her, that money will disappear in a year and a half.
Yes.
So we have a single mother, living with her mother, who's also a single mother of 4 children, working, doing her own business, trying to provide. They were petrified as to how they were going to pay for all of her rehabilitation and medical needs going forward. So what I did is what I always do, and what I said at the outset of the podcast. I did a deep dive. I looked into the historical evolution of the catastrophic impairment criteria from the 1990s to 2016. I looked at the underlying reasons why the legislatures passed that law. I looked at and interviewed actually some of the doctors who were retained by the Ministry of Finance to help provide medical opinions to the legislatures to help them draft that legislation, to get a sense of what their underlying reasons and rationale for making the suggestions that they did. And ultimately, it was their intention to reference every single level 1 trauma center as a hospital for clients like mine to be admitted to in order to satisfy the criteria for that particular section. And when I presented all of this to the insurance company, well, they quickly overturned their decision. But for me, that wasn't enough. And that's a time in one's career as a lawyer, especially a young lawyer starting out. You have to ask yourself, do I just owe a duty to the client who retained me, or do I also owe a duty to society at large? If I got a great decision for my client and I'm happy about it, she's happy, her family's happy, but I start to ask myself, well, what's going to stop the insurance company from taking advantage of this bureaucratic glitch in the legislation to do the same thing they did to my client to other young children who sustain traumatic brain injuries in the future? And when I thought about that question, the answer was very obvious. There would be nothing to stop them, and they actually will exploit that loophole. So that's when I took it upon myself to change the law. And I did that by lobbying politicians. Andrew Horwath was instrumental. I started to go to different law associations like the Ontario Trial Law Association to raise awareness. I wrote articles. Legal articles in legal journals. And then I went to the media. I was featured on the front cover of Hamilton Spec. A social justice, I'm looking at the article here by Susan Claremont in Hamilton Spec, featured me. And I brought so much awareness of it, I then leveraged that awareness in the public interest to then get a meeting with the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario, which is the government body that manages, regulates the Insurance Act and the Statutory Accident Benefit Schedule. And after some meetings with them, I persuaded them to amend that guideline. And they amended it so that all level 1 trauma centers will be included. And that was important because, just to give a bit of context, the hospitals that were originally on the list were hospitals really located close to or in major cities, right? Like Toronto, downtown Hamilton.
Absolutely.
And for me, that created a problem of discrimination based on geography. What about children who sustain traumatic brain injuries who live in more rural, remote areas of Ontario who are far away from these level 1 trauma centers and aren't brought to them? What's going to happen to them, right? So for me, there was that discriminatory aspect of it as well, which really drew my attention and made me more compelled to want to change the law.
Absolutely. Well, there was a lot there in terms of how you went about this, right? You're a real change maker, an influencer through the use of data and support of other people, right? To really influence how this actually can provide clarity to what the issue is, but actually make that difference in society at a level where, where do you draw the line? Is it just about this person, or can we actually influence how things are conducted? And in the world of healthcare specifically, geography plays a huge role, from a legal perspective, absolutely, but even just in the quality of care someone can receive, right? And how actively, or the access to that care that they can receive it. So falling through the cracks is something that sadly happens far too often in healthcare, whether it's for a catastrophic injury or something minor. It's incredibly easy to do so. And when I heard a little bit about your case the first time, that was the first thing I started to think about. Moreover, just, when you go for care and you're in that state where you're virtually dependent on everyone else to bring you somewhere, you don't get to choose, right? Like, so even if I need to go to a level 1 trauma center, right? You're going to go wherever the ambulance is taking you. So where's your choice in that? Can you advocate for yourself? And so there's so many other issues that can probably come to the surface with this. And, I kind of think of someone like you as, okay, we're going to start to chip away at these things one at a time for sure. But, now that we're on this topic, Andrew, what would you say are some of the other social issues or other things that may impede someone from being able to get the care they need and be addressed from a legal perspective?
Well, like a lot of my clients are Indigenous, especially after that file I made reference to. More Indigenous people have come to me to retain me, and one of the issues I realize, like early on when I take on these cases, is just the lack, and it's no one's fault, but there does exist a lack of trust of institutions, organizations that exist off the reservation, especially hospitals, right? There's sometimes a reluctancy to go to these hospitals to seek health care and satisfy their health care needs. I know for myself, even as a Black lawyer, going to the Six Nation Reserve, it did take a while for my client's mother to earn my trust. It took a long time, actually. I'm happy to say she trusts me now, but it's just one of those things, right? So that in and of itself is a barrier, and of course that's rooted in a lot of history. Obviously, you and listeners are probably aware of the colonial kind of systemic practices by the Canadian government to Indigenous people, which is another topic. But that distrust is valid, and it's I understand why they have it, but that acts as a barrier for sure.
Mm-hmm. And on that topic, how do you go about earning someone's trust when those are so deep? I mean, it sounds like you've done it at least once, and it must have an impact on you. So how do you go about earning their trust and navigating whatever impacts you can perceive?
Well, for me, like, you go about it how you would earn anybody's trust. You don't do it with words, you do it with action, right? So for me, it's setting the tone right at the beginning. As soon as I take on the case, I remember when I first met my client, it was at the hospital, and I went to visit her in the hospital, and I was there from the get-go. Immediately afterwards, I went to their house. I took it upon myself to drive to the Six Nation Reserve, go to her house, get to know her siblings, get to know her grandmother, get to know obviously her mother more, and not just do that once just for the sake of getting a retainer agreement signed, but to go there numerous times afterwards. And then of course, being there for them. I remember when I used to work before I started my own business, I had a cutoff time at 5. So after 5, no one could give me a call. But once I started my own business, I wanted to, change that culture, change that mindset. And a lot of lawyers might not agree with this, but I make myself accessible to my clients after 5. And for this particular case, my client's mother prefers to talk 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock, sometimes 10 o'clock. Right. And when she sees me doing that and accommodating her in any way I can, that means a lot. Right. And when you do that over and repeatedly again and again over the course of a year, you're going above and beyond the call of duty to accommodate them, to fight for them. That trust is slowly earned. Right. And of course, it comes with learning more about each other. So learning more about their culture, learning more about some of the barriers they face. And I'm learning more about myself as well, right? A lot of the barriers, interaction stems from ignorance, preconceived notions we have of other people. And once you take the time to learn about them, a lot of that ignorance dissipates, right? And that trust slowly starts to emerge.
So there's this quality and this ability to remain open to learning and allowing yourself to be available, but also to challenge your notions of what it was, how you think about it, so that you can establish that level of trust that's, as you talked about earlier on, being intimate, right?
Exactly.
And really showing them that you are there for them. You're actually hearing and seeing and understanding them as best as you can for who they are, and what is now in their life and how you can then support them. Absolutely.
Exactly.
And interestingly talked about, no longer just 5 o'clock is my cutoff time, and being an entrepreneur can often, lend itself to those kind of facets where you now have to adapt and you're doing things that you may not once have thought to be doing. And I saw this direct quote from Ellen Fitton. She has a law firm out in Connecticut, along with three other lawyers. And so she says, most lawyers aren't raised to think of practice of the law as a business. They become lawyers because they want to be lawyers, not business owners. So what was it like to venture on your own and start your own firm? And what prompted that move?
Yeah, that was a big change, and I really agree with that quote. You have to send that to me after this interview.
I can, yeah, sure.
But yeah, so when I was a lawyer, I primarily wore one hat, and I was a hat of a lawyer. I went in my office, I looked at my files, did my work, put in my hours for the day, and went home. The moment I started my own business, immediately you have to wear multiple hats. You have to handle your own financing. You have to handle your own marketing and advertising. You have to, I'm a solo practitioner, so I'm my own paralegal. I'm my own legal assistant. I'm the lawyer. I have to make myself available beyond 5. I have to accommodate my clients' different needs. Right. Some clients are more active at 6 o'clock in the morning. Some prefer, midnight.
Yes.
So sometimes I might get a text message even at 3:30 in the morning. All right. So yeah, you have to learn how to deal with a lot of these multiple hats that you immediately start wearing right at the outset, and it could be intimidating for a lot of people. I know it certainly was for me, because in law school they don't teach you how to advertise or market, right? They don't teach you how to handle your financing, do your bookkeeping, take care of your corporate tax, all that. Like, they don't teach you that. So these are all things that I had to learn on my own. And during, while I'm learning this stuff, I'm still running a practice. So I'm still going to do actual legal work. So,
I'm with you on all of this, Andrew. I'm with you.
But I don't want to sound too cliche. Where there's a will, there's a way, and if you want it bad enough, you'll find time to learn everything you need to do to push your business forward, and still get the legal work done. So I just told myself, listen, no excuses. Look at this as a great opportunity. You're going to learn so much more. You're going to be so much more resourceful. You're going to grow leaps and bounds personally and professionally. You're going to get so much more out of the work that you do as well. Every time I go out there, it's like I put my last name there, Rudder, right? So, it's one of those things where now it represents you, right? So you take even a lot more pride in the work that you do and you put out there for people to see, right?
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Having a business, I find, is a very personal endeavor, and one that I find I have a lot of pride in as well. And that consists of learning and growing and evolving over time and adapting to things you're never taught to do. But also allowing yourself to do that and having the space to do that. You talked about doing a lot of the systemic change and wanting to move forward, and actually have done some of that already with some of your clients. So has that had a role in what prompted you to move out on your own? Or was there something entirely different that motivated you to do this?
There were several reasons why I wanted to go it on my own. One was I wanted to start my law firm to change the perception society has of people of color. Provide the next generation with a positive role model to see themselves in, right? So they believe it's possible for them to do the same thing. That's really important for me. Another reason I started my law firm was I wanted to improve, right? Diversity, inclusion. belonging and equity in the legal profession, right? As a young Black lawyer, I remember when I was called to the bar, and my grandmother was in attendance. My late grandmother, she sadly passed, but she was there in attendance. And as I was going, stepping to the stage to become a lawyer, she was all happy, proud, and afterwards she came up to me and she said, I could count the number of people of color on the fingers of one hand. And I'll never forget that. It's one of those things you hear and it's like, yeah, it's so true. But for me, this was like a manifestation of the effect that systemic racism has had and continues to have, right, on the admission of Black law students to law schools and the inclusion of Black lawyers in law firms. And my late grandmother also remarked on another quote that I love, credited to Mahatma Gandhi, and it reads as follows: "Be the change you wish to see in the world." And for me, that was so powerful because it reminded me that if I wait for others to take action on my behalf to eliminate systemic racism, then I'll be waiting a lifetime. So for me, during the height of the global pandemic, where businesses were either closing down or downsizing all around me, I chose to start my own law firm, which would contribute obviously to diversity, inclusion, belonging, and equity in the legal profession. I essentially chose to be the change I wanted to see in the world. Right. Another reason I started my law firm was for freedom. Freedom to build a law firm, the way I want to establish the culture that I want, that's reflective of my own attitudes, beliefs, etc. The freedom to take on larger social justice issues like the one we talked about earlier that are bigger than myself, right? And to give value back to the community and help people like my catastrophic impairment clients who are most in need. So those are some of the reasons why I started.
Well, those are already motivating me, and I don't have the experience you have, nor that kind of cultural background. But I certainly come from a society, and I used to work with a range of different people, and I heard similar stories as yours in some facets, and I can see that, right? And I take notice too of that, but I bet it has a different impact on you, but I can see your grandmother had a huge influence on your values and motivating you to be that change, and be able to then inspire others to also be part of that change. It's very motivating for me to hear that, and I know that we talked about that quote a while ago, so it still resonates with me, and it always has resonated with me. The value around freedom too, certainly allows somebody, if you want to see that change, you have to also embody that change, right? And you need the freedom to do that in some ways, right? But you don't have to be told you have freedom. You have to take it on, right? And I always wonder if for you to be able to do that, and whether prompted from your grandmother or something else, what was the hardest or the simplest part of doing that?
Well, I mean, the simplest part is, when you're practicing law or when you're pursuing any sort of profession for some time, over time, you start to get a sense of how you want to do things. And when you're exposed to different cultures working for other people, you also get a sense of what you don't want to do and what you don't want to see, right? Yes. And for some of the law firms I was at, I didn't agree with some of the decision making or the way that they view clients more like a number as opposed to respecting them as individuals and people. It was more about just their decision based on bringing in money, right? And sometimes, bringing in money is not the best thing for the client at a particular time in the case. And you want to be a lawyer of integrity who realizes that. You can look at yourself in the mirror, right? So, a combination of those things made it easier for me. I'm one person, and grandmother, my parents really instilled this in me. If you don't like where you are, change your position, right? If you can't find a job that has the right culture that you're searching for, create that job and create the culture. Don't sit around and complain. Get up off your butt, make things happen. If you're tired about the way there's a lack of inclusion, exclusivity, belonging, etc., in the legal profession, don't just cry about it and complain and lament. Get up, in my case, start your own law firm, and in doing that, you create opportunities for other people. But what I really like is that other people, younger people, the next generation, can see you doing it as well. And then, they plant that little seed in their head and they begin to realize that it's possible for them too, especially when they see someone who looks like them and comes from a similar background as they do, right? That's very powerful. That's really powerful for me because I remember when I was starting, wanting to become a lawyer, graduate from law school, I didn't have that person that I can go to and get help, who I could, view as a mentor. So I spent a lot of time and struggled figuring out things on my own. And I always said to myself, if I ever get to a position where I'm successful, I always want to make myself available for the next generation and help them out so they don't have to go through what I did.
The power of representation, the power of, I'm also hearing from your own lived experience, kind of planting a seed for yourself to say, this is what I want to do differently. Even when you didn't quite know what that this was, it was clear to you to say, once I get wherever I'm going, I'm doing this differently. And so the concept of, the how and living with integrity, really stands out to me. And, if you're going to do transformational or systematic change, living with integrity and also, being true to those facets of how you truly want to work, and then be there for other people, dramatically can make a huge difference at the onset, right? If you know how clearly you want to communicate what it is you're doing, but also stand by that consistently over time, it plants a seed in yourself, but it also grows that seed with others. Yeah.
Absolutely. When you have a firm understanding of your attitudes, beliefs, what you stand for, the decision-making process is so much easier. When you're confronted, do I do A or B? There's nothing really to think about, if you want to be true to yourself, you know what you stand for, what you value.
Mm-hmm. And last year, like I said, you won the Reisman Award for the best law firm, recognizing your work in changing the law system. And I'm hearing you're not stopping there. So have you set your sights on what's next for you in the coming years? Yeah. I mean, going back to the law that I changed, I was happy with the result, but I don't think it goes far enough. Including all level 1 trauma centers on that list of hospitals in the guideline is a great first start. But I'm now working on including all level 2 trauma centers as well. Level 2 trauma centers, oftentimes if someone's involved in an accident and they're in a remote rural area in Ontario, there's usually a smaller hospital, usually like a level 3 hospital that they would be sent to first. And depending on the extent of their injuries, and depending on what the protocols are at that particular hospital, they could either get sent to a level 2 or level 1 trauma center. Mm-hmm. It really depends on how quickly they have to get that patient to a hospital bed, right? Because it depends on the injury that they sustained. Yeah, sometimes the beds available.
And available beds exactly as well, right? So the chance of someone getting sent to a level 2 trauma center is greater the more, like, depending on where they live, the more remote the town or village that they live in is. And because of that, I think that there is still a lot of people like my client who are going to be overlooked for that catastrophic impairment designation for that reason. So I want to push the Financial Services Regulatory Authority of Ontario even further to also amend the guideline and a step further and include all level 2 trauma centers. That was something that I proposed in our meetings. Sometimes, unfortunately, you have to take the victory you get when you're pushing, government body to do the right thing, and then regroup and come back and push them a little bit more. So that's one of the big objectives for 2023.
Oh, provincial laws, here we come, and affecting the world of healthcare and the legal ramifications of, how people engage with their healthcare and the care that they receive. So Andrew, in our time together, it's been very evident that you're here for the next generation to represent who they are, but be the change they want to see in the world, and stay motivated by it while advocating for those most in need in the system. So I'm so grateful that you've been able to be here with me today, and I'm looking forward to seeing how these changes play out.
Thank you so much, Amanda, for having me. It was an absolute pleasure joining you and your audience, your listeners. I had fun talking to you. I hope you and your audience got some value from what we've talked about. And and who knows, maybe I might be back on your show again sometime in the future.
Sounds good. Okay. Thanks, Andrew. Thanks for tuning in to today's Leaders for Tomorrow's Future podcast. This podcast would not exist without you. Consider nominating yourself or someone else you know at AmandaCalzolaio.com and click on today's leaders. Have yourself a wonderful day. Until next time, see yourself as the leader you want and choose to be, knowing that parts of you already are one.